Welcome to another episode of Tech Unhinged, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered world of technology, innovation, and the incredible people driving that change. I'm Usher, and today we're exploring AI in healthcare, disruptor or savior. I'm joined by Sabeen Shaikh, who is a global MedTech leader and has built a career at the intersection of technology and healthcare. Currently, she is the managing partner at Christian Strategy Consulting and acts as a trusted advisor to corporations, investors, and international governments. Sabeen, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Asher. It's been delightful to be welcome to this podcast as well, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So one of the things that I was, when I was looking up at your LinkedIn, that kind of popped up was that you're a honorary member at the United States Air Force. So I'd love to, kind of know about how did that happen? Healthcare, technology, Air Force. That's a, an interesting mix.
Yes. So in my consulting practice, I've had the opportunity in the past to work on med tech innovation that ended up having a cross-industry use case with defense and specifically with Air Force. When I moved back to the US about 2.5 years ago from living overseas, I had the invitation to judge a pitch competition actually up with the Air Force commanders. And
Okay.
I was judging the med tech side, but of course there was defense tech that was in there and of course ag tech as well. And
Okay.
so my introduction to the Air Force on a personal level came through this pitch competition, and I ended up becoming more engaged and invited to become an honorary commander.
You've worked across, US, Asia, Australia within corporations and kind of as an, external executive or consultant. What's the most surprising thing that these three different worlds have taught you around leadership and how, people kind of work with companies and lead companies?
So this was a really interesting question for me to reflect on. I think that when I left corporate, I was used to leading teams in a very specific type of way that was taught from a corporate standpoint. And then going into the innovation side of the ecosystem and working with startups, a lot of these people had not had that same type of training. And so for me, one of my biggest learnings were that you have to be really adaptable and agile in your leadership abilities and capabilities, and always need to bring people along on the journey, whether you're working with people from a corporate setting or working with people from an early stage startup. You have to find, for all of them, the commonalities are that you have to find what the main drivers are personally and professionally and bring them
Okay.
along on the journey. Otherwise, they're not, it doesn't matter what environment you're in, no one's going to follow you.
Okay. I mean, I found that there's a very different style of leadership in US versus leadership in Asia, at least from my personal experience, right? So, I mean, in US, it's more very direct, hands-on, to the point. Even, I don't know if you read it, but there's this thought, radical candor. Yes. So the idea was that, hey, but in Asia, I felt it's a different style of, the way they kind of communicate to people or something. Did you see, any difference there or?
Absolutely. So I coming from the US and initially being groomed in the US from a leadership capacity, and also being a top performer nationally and globally for my previous companies. I came with a certain, I guess, leadership style that was very US centric and worked for the US teams and ecosystem. So when
Yeah.
I moved to Australia, I remember the very first comment that someone made to me on the Australian side when I had done a presentation on these are the things that we're going to change, is that he said, all you Americans think you're cowboys and think you can just come here and tell us what to do. Well, that's not how it works here. So
Yeah.
I was taken aback. It was the very first comment that my new team member and the national team I was presenting to had said to me. And so for me, there was a learning experience about not just the Australian and New Zealand ecosystem, but then the rest of Asia as well. So as I'm working with people out of India or Singapore, Japan, for example, everybody had a very different style. And for me, what was really helpful was learning from a course that was presented by Erin Myers at INSEAD. Or she was one part of a course, actually, I should say that. And I can't remember the name of the book. I think it was called The Cultural Map. And in that, it talks about which countries tend to be more direct and which ones tend to need to have that relationship built, which ones are better with the eye contact and which ones are not, and tend to steer away from that or steer away from
Yeah.
conflict. So for me, I really ended up having to dive deep into this type of methodology, understand how I could best work with the people from all the different countries in Asia Pacific, and then transition back to the US and receive or achieve global results.
Moving into the topic at hand, right? So healthcare. I've been in technology for almost, I think now, 18, 19 odd years. And in the last few years, I've seen that AI has been a kind of people have kind of been trying to adopt AI within the healthcare ecosystem. In the last 2, 3 years with Gen AI coming in, that has kind of, that the rate of AI adoption has really jumped, right? So it's gone from, I don't know, 100 to 500% or something of those lines. But what do you think, and what's the difference really between AI that truly improves patient outcomes and AI that's just, window dressing, or the way I've kind of called it at a couple of places, just a bolt-on approach, right? So what do you think is the true difference between those kind of two implementations?
It's a great question. So, just for context, I've been working with AI ML technologies within healthcare for probably the last 7 roughly years. And
Nice.
so I've been quite passionate about this space. And more specifically, I generally work with regulated AI ML technologies. And what that means is that it's anything that's predictive or diagnostic in nature has to go through the FDA regulatory process for approval. And so there is another additional step that needs to happen for it. It's not just a pure software type of play for
Okay.
AI ML. Now, when we're talking about predictive or diagnostic in nature, about things that are identifying, like cancer diagnosis, or, things that are happening, cardiopulmonary issues that are happening ahead of time, or maybe it's something along the lines of segmenting tissue and bony anatomy in the body, right? So like we're looking at the things that AI and ML can do and that support the physician or clinical staff from a diagnostic perspective, predictive perspective, or even workflow perspective. Now, that being said, there are a lot of technologies that are out there, a ton. I think everyone is always, the end goal is to improve patient lives, improve patient outcomes, and also improve the lives of the clinical staff, because ultimately what they want is something that's going to make their lives easier as well and not add more work to, the plate that they already have and are already time for on. So the things that I'm seeing are, if it's really truly a savior, there are diagnostic and predictive software technologies out there that are helping and implementing well into the workflow. The ones that don't implement well into the workflow for the clinician or into the patient journey are the ones that are window dressing. So while they might have
Okay.
an amazing use case, they might have their FDA clearances, they might have clinical trials to show the work, but if it's not integrating well into the system, and each system is different, right? But like if it's not integrating well, it's never going to take off, and it'll just be window dressing and something blingy. So that's one thing I have to say. And then the next thing related to this is that AI ML technologies have not been very well adopted so far in the medtech industry. I mean that from a corporate standpoint. There's a lot of different things that are involved that comes from a reimbursement play and, like again, workflow. And does it fit into the workflow? Does it fit into the tech stack for the company? And so I think right now there's a big opportunity for these technologies that are truly there to improve patient outcomes if they can get integrated correctly to do that. But, the healthcare or medtech industry is still quite far behind.
Okay. So nurses, doctors, everybody is so used to a certain way working. There's definitely a technology factor playing it, but how much of a factor is the human acceptance of things as well, right? So a doctor accepting the fact, okay, now this X-ray has come in and I'll have AI kind of go through it and tell me a diagnosis versus, previously a radiologist is there, he looks at data and looks at everything. Have you seen this? How welcoming have those professionals been, in terms of accepting, yes, this is something that we can work with and not having this thought that, hey, it's going to replace my job or anything, the constant fear that people have today.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. That's a really big concern that comes up. I would say that radiology was probably one of the very first areas
Yeah.
for AIML to be adopted into the healthcare ecosystem, and that's like
Yeah.
where it's making biggest waves or has been making the biggest waves. But there are a number of other areas as well. So if we're looking at in the cardiac space or orthopedic space for as examples, I would say that there is a lack of trust factor when it comes to the clinicians from an adoption standpoint. So of course, we've got the workflow, and now there's what is AI/ML? How is it actually going to work? Like what are the guardrails? Is it safe? Is it accurate? They like to still be involved with the decision making. So is it going to take away their decision making, or is it going to aid their decision making? Which of course is going to aid their decision making, but I can understand why a clinician that's trained through medical school and years of residence would think that it's taking away that decision making that they've grown to love. So I think there is this lack of trust and acceptance that's happening on the clinician side when it comes to the adoption of these technologies. But ultimately and there's also a lack of trust and acceptance that's on the patient side as well
Okay.
to use this and what's happening with the data, right? So
Yeah.
it goes two ways. Like I think, the ones that are going direct to consumer and patients are actually buying those things directly, that's one completely different category because there is already some type of trust and acceptance from the patient or consumer on that side. But the ones that need to go through this entire clinical workflow, which are usually the ones that I'm working with, there's a lack of trust from both the clinician and the patient. Their data, what's happening with their data, is accurate. And I think that part is going to have to change. Like we have to really build that trust first in the ecosystem before, these stakeholders continue to try to be comfortable with adopting this technology.
So my niece is a radiologist, so that's why I'm very familiar with
Yep.
that. She works. She's also based off in London, UK. So yeah, so that's where this radiologist example came on from. So now you mentioned a few different places, right? So where do you think, based on what you've seen so far, the people you've worked with, is where AI ML has really proven itself as a genuine savior in the healthcare industry? I know there's predictive, there's diagnostic abilities, but one or two real world examples where yes, this is an absolutely deal breaker, or this has been really really a very good implementation of AI ML.
I think one of the examples that comes to mind is an AI ML technology that I've seen in the IVF space.
Okay.
And this particular technology is able to identify which embryos are going to have the highest likelihood of success.
Wow. Okay.
And so
That's
that is something that's quite interesting because, of course, the IVF journey is quite stressful for a lot of couples and costly as well and time consuming, right? Like couples can end up going through years of IVF therapy before they can effectively conceive. So this one particular technology is able to shorten that duration by really identifying the embryos that would have the highest likelihood of success based on its predictive technology.
That's actually very interesting, and that's something that directly impacts a lot of things in terms of increasing success ratios and everything. Okay, that's very interesting. You mentioned that you've kind of worked predictive AI in orthopedics, neuro, cardiopulmonary use cases, among others. How do you judge where? I mean, this case that's perfectly, I think, 100% suitable, where you're able to identify embryos that can have the most successful ratio. But other than that particular case, what other predictive tools are really helping patients and is just not kind of, adding another screen for the doctors to look at or to see through?
Another opportunity that I've had the chance to work with is an AI ML technology that is able to predict early onset of Alzheimer's years before that it actually happens. And this is something that hasn't existed and it is absolutely game changing, right? So now, because it's able to identify who's going to have Alzheimer's symptoms about 5 years before those symptoms actually manifest, entire care team is able to get involved earlier and start managing that patient and trying to delay the onset of symptoms or prevent it altogether. And that's still pretty early. They do have FDA clearance, but I would say it's still pretty early, but very promising. And that would be a game changer. That is absolutely
Okay.
going to be a game changer.
How do these systems or studies kind of get access to the right data, right? So let's say if somebody has had Alzheimer's and we're looking at 5 years old data to predict that, hey, if you have these XYZ symptoms, then there's a, X percentage chance for getting Alzheimer's. I mean, you need to have some data, right? So you need to have some valid data. How do they get access to that data? Is it small studies, large scale studies?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think this is where the key difference between MedTech, so anything that's software as a medical device, regulated AI ML versus something that's just general AI ML and wellness.
Okay.
This is the key difference in this. And I think this is like where there's a lot of misunderstanding from the investor side as well. Medical technology, even if it's a software technology, still takes quite a bit of time to get to market. It needs a lot of clinical studies to
Okay.
prove out what it's working on. So this is not something that was just invented 5 years ago. This is something that's been in the works for about 15 plus years. And gathering that data to be able to prove out these endpoints, and follow the patients that they've been identifying. And now this particular technology is able to capture over 400 different digital biomarkers with their platform, and they are able to understand that certain combinations of these digital biomarkers result in, someone's going to have these symptoms in the next 5 years.
Okay. So there's a difference between health tech and med tech, right? So health tech can be just a technology SaaS product, anything around health and
Yeah.
wellness, like you pointed out. And med tech is more like how maybe pharmaceutical companies create drugs and might have to go through that similar kind of a process for a med tech product to come into place. Okay, interesting. So I was in one of your Forbes article, you warned that personalization could actually fragment healthcare further. So A, can you elaborate a little bit more on that and what's that about? And then B, how do we avoid that trap?
I want to preface this answer with I'm a big fan of personalization. I'm a fan of the direction that healthcare is going with the personalized opportunities and the predictive opportunities to make sure that care for myself or everyone, in the world is more tailored to each individual person's needs and systems that they are in. Now, when I think about all these technologies that are coming to market, and they're very impressive technologies, right? They're all in isolation. You've got big device companies. So we'll talk about like the big corporates that own a lot of the ecosystem tech stacks, right? So they're the ones that have the infrastructure set in place. They're the ones that are having like the robots or, ultrasound machines. All the technology stacks are with the medical device manufacturers. And then you've got the EHR systems like Epic and Cerner that have it from the digital health record side. Now you've got all this innovation coming in that is being developed by innovative startups, but none of those actually integrate into these technology stacks. So while I can get, predictive analysis of, what my brain waves are doing and identify fatigue a little bit earlier, which, that's out there, or I can, identify things that are happening to me through some wearable sensor technology that might be accessible to me, through other means that is still software as a medical device, right? Like, because it's connected to some type of software algorithm platform. None of these are actually integrating with the tech stack. So what I'm saying is that fragmentation, I think, will grow. We already have a fragmented ecosystem where tech stacks don't talk to each other. And now with all this personalized innovation that's coming into play, you might have a different wearable than I do. And neither one of these two wearables might connect
Yep.
into the tech stack that, of the hospital system or the groups that we're going into. So this is where I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit more fragmented, and it will be fragmented. And the way we can fix this, it's not necessarily through us on the consumer side. It's actually going to be at the medical device corporate side, and on the EHR system side. They're the ones that are going to have to be open to allowing these technology stacks to integrate into their systems. And the hospitals will have to be open to letting these technology stacks integrate into their systems that their clinics and hospitals are using for all the information and the data flow to happen.
Right. Yeah. So that was my one of my other questions. You mentioned this before, technology being problem. Why? I've always struggled to understand this. I mean, you have Athena, you have Epic, you have CureMD, you have I don't know how many EHRs, EMRs there are out there, and then you have EHRs for cardio patients, you have EHRs for surgical patients, and it's so much segregated. I have never been able to really understand that why healthcare of all industries is so bad at connecting the dots. If you look at US generally, their process systems are amazing, right? So I think it's by far one of the best countries out there who've been able to create single source of truths for data, for processes, for everything. But healthcare, yeah, it's just spread out. What do you think is the reason behind? I mean, can't they have one federal EMR system for every citizen of theirs? Or
That would be amazing. When I was living in Australia, I remember that they had implemented a national system. Like I moved back to the US shortly thereafter. So I actually don't know like how that implementation has gone. And to me, I thought that was a great idea that everything goes into this one system and
right,
that you as a patient can access that system and pull out whatever information you need whenever you need it. I
correct,
think the issue is that, first of all the different companies and EHR stacks offer a different value proposition or a slightly different value proposition, right? So which is why they're vying for customers and trying to sell to this hospital ecosystem or to that clinician, while they all do something similar, the value propositions are like nuanced, right, of what they're trying to achieve with their technology. And in the US, so I'll talk about the US specifically, each of the stakeholders in the ecosystem, like the payers, so like the health funds or the insurance companies, I should say, the corporate, the hospital systems, the clinicians, all have different priorities and levers that they're trying to achieve. So I think this lack of alignment, and it is what it is, right? The payers are looking to achieve something from like how much they're paying out and how much they're saving money and like the healthcare costs. Like clinician is, of course, like doing their procedures and, trying to earn what they're meant to be earning. The hospitals are trying to save costs. Like, everyone's got different competing
Right.
interests. And so I think this is where that fragmentation also happens. Like, unless we have one unified system that all of these players are, aligned to, we're going to always have fragmentation.
Right. Or maybe even if it's very hard to put them all together, maybe, they create this law where any update that happens to my profile in Athena or any update that happens to my profile in Epic has to go to some central source of truth, right? So all these technology companies have to make sure that my data, whenever it gets updated in their portal or in their system, because you go to one hospital, they're connected to Epic, you go to an emergency for some, disconnected to Athena, it can maybe push to some federal space where at least all that data is being consolidated or something. But yeah, that's I think it's one of the problems that they've been trying to solve and they haven't been able to solve, or they don't want to solve. That's you never know. But okay, that's interesting. So you've also written about funding gaps for software as a medical device, right? So what do you think investors still kind of misunderstand about these regulated AI products, and why does that gap kind of exist?
Yeah, so I think when software as medical device like had been coming to fruition, it's been so new and it's still fairly new to the investor world. The challenge that we were seeing is that most investment funds are either deep tech, so they really know the med tech space on the hardware side and really enjoy the deep tech opportunities to understand that regulatory process and the clinical trial needs, or the funds are on the direct to consumer side and SaaS. So they really understand the SaaS vertical and something that's direct to consumer that's not regulated.
Right.
Now, software as medical device doesn't neatly fit into either of those categories. You go to a deep
Mm.
tech fund and they say, sorry, you're software. We don't understand software. So then you go to the software fund and they say, no, 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 you're regulated medical technology. We don't understand the regulations around that. And for them, it's scary, right? They don't understand like how long something will take to get to market, and where they're used to seeing something get to market in 2 years. That's not going
Right.
to be the same thing with med tech. And then on the
Right.
deep tech side, they know exactly what happens with, production, product design, all these different things. They understand these steps, but when it comes to software, they have no idea, and nor should they at this moment understand, like what all the different iterations mean, and like how to safeguard, the data that's coming through and protect patient privacy. There's so many different nuances in there, and I think that is why it's not. I know that is why the funding gap exists for software as medical device. Now that being said, I think we've seen a number of SAMD companies fail, over the last few years because they weren't able to get funding. I think it's ripe for private equity to come in and pick up some of these different
Mm.
opportunities and consolidate them and roll them up into, one type of company or value proposition that's more interesting to them. And we are seeing now that there are some funds that are starting to look into software as medical device as part of a thesis and bringing on the right expertise or right external expertise to be able to work with that type of portfolio investment.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it kind of falls somewhere in the middle, and you need somebody who can understand the software side and he can understand the tech side, and he has perspective on both views. So maybe somebody like that can make it better. All right. You've worked across different continents. Can you, in your opinion, tell who's leading the way in adopting AI in healthcare? US, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, this is I actually feel like this is probably like a bit of a loaded question because I think we could segment this out in a few different ways. I
Okay.
feel that China, actually, I haven't worked in China, but everything that's coming out of China and the way they're implementing AI opportunities into that ecosystem, I think is further ahead than any of the other countries right now. So
Okay.
like
Interesting.
they've got completely like robot AI ML robot ran hospital now, and I don't know if you've seen that where
No,
patients actually see a robot.
so they've made Superman true, right? So that first scene in Superman, the new one, I don't know if you've seen it, but
No, I haven't.
you haven't seen it? All right. So when he gets injured, so he gets to his that fortress of solitude, right? So there's robots that pick him up and they kind of start treating him and saying that you need sun and everything. So they've kind of made that real then.
That's a direction that AI is going as well, right? So we've got AI, of course, and like the generalized AI opportunity. And now you're looking at, and of course, the locked AI ML opportunity for software as medical device or for the healthcare, because it has to be locked, right, for the FDA clearances. And then, it does its predictive diagnostic actions. You've got agentic AI systems that are coming into play, like within vertical AI, which falls into that. And then the next phase is physical AI and embodied AI, which incorporates the robot. And so China is,
But
leading. Go
but
ahead.
there's an element of empathy and when you're treating patients, right? So there's this sensitive element to that as well. But robots leading, becoming a doctor, don't you think that's a little too harsh, maybe on patients? Or I mean, yeah.
Look, I think a hybrid model could actually work.
Hmm.
That I think that there is a sense of empathy, and there are certain situations, of course, that you don't want a robot there. You want a human, human interaction. You want the entire human care team. I mean, I think about that like from an oncology perspective. Of
Yes.
course, like or something as close as like pregnancy, right? I think that those are, in my opinion, like things that are areas that people would want that empathy. But there are other areas where some people just want a decision. Tell me diagnose me. Do I have chest infection? Something very
Yeah.
quick, and they don't want
Right.
to wait hours or days to get in to see someone.
Right. So basically segregating between where you need more care versus where you just need a treatment. So right, maybe where you just need some sort of treatment, some sort of initial diagnosis and go in, go out and just get done with it versus where there's care. So maybe that part can be entirely automated and that actually can improve your overall healthcare speed and process too. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So but that's
Actually,
that's that's news.
yeah. So, in addition to that, I think that another area that it could be triage. You could have robots that are initially doing the triage in a facility and identifying then, that patient needs to see. So now you're taking away, the main bottleneck that happens for ERs and hospital systems is that triaging area.
Yeah. And you've actually seen, so I think telehealth systems were a first step towards that stage where you're able to access remote areas via telehealth solutions. You're able
Yeah.
to deal more patients and everything. So that kind of process already started with that, all
Yeah.
those telehealth solutions coming up. All right. So let's talk about a little about women in tech. You've led Medtronic's Women Network in APAC region. Unique perspectives do you think women are able to bring to the overall AI healthcare conversation that are, kind of often overlooked, or what's the unique perspective from our side?
Yes, I think first of all, it's unfortunate that women are oftentimes excluded from these conversations, and and I don't think it's been by design. I mean, I don't know what the right word is to say on this one. Like, I don't think it's been malintent to do that. I think it's just conversations are happening. Someone's connected to someone. They bring in this person. And it happens to be most fields are male dominated. So I think like there's that element. But I think with women in the healthcare ecosystem in general, or in the family system, they're the ones that tend to be the caretakers. They're the ones that are taking the kids or looking after the husband. Taking them to the doctor's appointments. Interacting with the physicians, the nurses. Usually the ones that are organized about the medical records, making sure that they have everything that they need. For this doctor's appointment or for this visit or transition. So I think the miss is that not having that female perspective of how does it make their life easier? What are the needs, for a system or technology to be integrated correctly from the user case side and on that specific side. So it's not just the clinician or patient workflow, but on the female side on, what are we missing and like what else do we need to have that? And I think that's probably one of the biggest missed opportunities.
Interesting. So since they have to take care of all of these things, what are the things that we really need to do to make them, for them to be able to do that better or easier, that kind of perspective?
Yeah, I think it's like they're understanding what some of the gaps are more so than
Hmm.
someone that's not doing that, right? So they're the ones that are understanding, wow, it is so hard for me to get my medical information from this health system to transfer to this system, whatever it is, they're the ones that are actually living the challenges and obstacles in
Right.
their healthcare journey compared to someone that not having to deal with them. They can just show up for an appointment and show up for the next appointment because everything's organized for them.
Correct. So what is the one change that you'd like to see in innovation labs to, in places where this happens, where this voice can then shape the overall future of healthcare AI?
I think the labs or the companies need to be more intentional about finding a non-clinical, non-business advisor that's actually on this adjacent use case, right? So it needs to be in an advisory role that they bring a female in or a few females into that from a brainstorming perspective and guidance perspective on, how this could actually work into their lives and like filling in the gap, product design.
So on a personal note, what's one lesson that you've kind of learned or faced as a woman in medtech that has that you feel that has really shaped you or that really influenced you on what you are today?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind is that I've always prided myself on the success that I've had in my roles, right? And so for me, I never wanted to be identified as a female in medtech. I wanted to be identified as one of the best leaders in medtech. And so for me, I've always worked hard to ensure that my numbers or my skills are at the top, of the industry, from a quantitative perspective, qualitative perspective, strategic perspective. I've always been at the top.
Right.
And for me, that's shaped that. So like, I happen to be a female in medtech, but that's not my identity. I'm a very strong leader in medtech. And I think that's something that oftentimes gets missed. I think that instead of focusing on being a female in medtech or female in business and, like needing more opportunities, which of course, like as women, I think like there are missed opportunities for training and education in certain ways and to level up the playing field. I think everybody in whatever field they're in needs to strive to be at the top, not use the gender as something that they want to point a finger to.
On a closing note, if you had to place one big bet, right, what would that bet be on, in terms of one single AI breakthrough that you truly believe that will redefine patient care in the next decade? What would that bet be?
Yeah. Something I'm very excited about this. I think it's going to be the agentic AI systems and vertical AI that's going to transform the patient engagement, patient care process.
In what capacity? In the sense of,
Um,
once first visit to the end care treatment, or?
I think it's going to change the way that the patient engagement is happening and the answers patients are receiving. It's going to improve their experience and outcomes because they're receiving these answers in real time.
In real time.
Through agentic AI systems, right? Like, so and instead of having to wait for the doctor or the nurse to respond back to you, everything's in a closed loop ecosystem where you've got a system set up of a number of agents that are
Right.
acting on behalf of the doctor or clinician, or, like within like a medical device company, like when it comes to the patient engagement side of things and responding in real time, within the privatized system for that patient, collecting the digital biomarkers, digital markers, like what's relevant for that patient, their symptoms as well,
Okay.
as they're and putting everything into there. So now you've got this entirely new vertical that's being created underneath AI, and the way this could transform the patient experience and keep patients involved in their therapy longer term, transform outcomes for sure, and have better involvement from the company and the clinician.
Right. Awesome. Yes, absolutely. So if I were to place a bet, I don't know if it's happening right now or not, but what I would want to wish is if disruption can really happen in preventive healthcare. So rather than having reactive healthcare, there are a lot of things that if you can know your markers or if you can identify, like the Alzheimer example, right? So for instance, diabetes for that matter is a completely lifestyle prevention disease, right? So if you change your lifestyle, you can 100% prevent it, stop it, or even reverse it or things like that. My bet really would be if preventive healthcare can be a place where if you're taking medicines when you're 40, 45, rather you're able to push that to when you're 70 or 60 or 80 or whatever. So that's the way I would love AI and the systems with the data, all of the data that they have. If something of that can be built and put together.
I completely agree with you. I think that that's really the most idyllic way for us to reduce our chronic diseases, right?
Right.
Or, issues that are coming up, but especially the chronic diseases. And I think like
Right.
the preventative side it's absolutely exciting. I think, I hope that, this is something that us as consumers are able to and willing to put money into, as well as employers,
Right.
like, because right now, unfortunately, like the way the reimbursement systems are set up in the US, so I'll talk about specifically the US, is that it's not based on preventative care. It's based on point of care
Yeah.
once someone has a disease diagnosed, right?
Yeah.
So the whole reimbursement system is based off of that, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
until that changes, I think the preventative care is going to be additional cost. And this is like where it's going to cause some of that fragmentation that we were talking about as well. some people, some groups will have that and implement that for their own lifestyles, and some other groups won't be able
Right.
to afford to do
Right.
that. I'm with you. Like that is absolutely the vision, and the ideal state is that, we've got this robust implementation of preventative care, and we're able to identify Alzheimer's ahead of time. We're able to identify diabetes, like earlier on,
Correct.
reduce, make lifestyle changes to have healthier populations for
Right,
sure.
correct. Absolutely. No, the entire system has to change. It has to go from react. I'm big pharma for that matter, right? So
Yeah.
that's what they sell on, right? So it has to kind of completely move in the other direction. All right. I think that's it from my side, Sabine. Thank you for joining us today. It was been a real privilege, kind of hearing your perspective. You managed to cut through the hype, and we've been able to talk about what AI in healthcare really means. I always thought that robots treating patient was a hype, but apparently it's not. I'll definitely read up on that. And I appreciate the honesty and depth you kind of brought to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Asher, for having me on here. Like this is also a pleasure on my end. I love speaking about this stuff, and I can speak for hours about this. So
Awesome. All right.
pleasure is all mine.
Thank you. Thank you so much.